Well, I just got finished watching Joker Folie A Duex for the first time, and I had been putting it off for a few months because I had heard nothing but bad things about it. And yet, I still went into it thinking, like, well, it can't be that bad, right? I was wrong, it can. It can definitely be that bad. I can't say there's many movies that disappointed me to the level that this one did. And that's saying a lot with the type of movies that came out this year. There's a lot about this movie that I really want to talk about, so I'm going to split it up into sections. And the first is about the musical parts. I knew coming into the movie that it was going to be a musical, or at least have a lot of singing numbers throughout the movie. The problem with that is that they just didn't feel good. I think the majority of the time that the musical portions popped on screen, they were all in Arthur's head. It was all kind of random and out of nowhere with seemingly no warning, and then would jump cut basically to an entirely different scene where you feel like you were missing key portions in between. And this isn't to say that the music and the songs are bad, because I don't think they are. It's just one of those things where if you're going to make a musical, the musical numbers need to be entertaining all the way and have you like fully invested in them. But this movie just didn't do that, and it became really tedious to see one of them pop up, because then you're gonna have a cut to a different scene or feel like you're missing part of the movie with just choppy editing. The movie didn't need to be a musical. I feel like they looked at the script unfinished and said, well, we have Lady Gaga now, let's just have some singing in there. The next thing that I want to talk about is the story, because the story essentially ends in the exact same place that it started. Now, from this point on, I'm probably going to be getting into spoilers, either intentional or unintentional, so if you don't mind, please keep watching. Just throwing that warning out there. But what I mean with the story ending in the same place it started is because nothing really happens throughout the entire movie. It starts with Arthur in jail, and it ends with Arthur in jail. The only thing that happens in between is a court trial, which you would imagine would be a lot of the movie. And it really isn't. It really doesn't feel like we're in the courtroom much at all. And that is really crazy to say, considering like the time that this movie has to develop. I'm pretty sure it's well over 2 hours, so like it's not like they had a short runtime. They had a lot of time to kind of set things up and expand on the story they wanted to tell, but instead it feels like you spent 2 hours going through like 2 days of their in-universe time, if that makes sense. Like, nothing goes fast, really. Another thing I was really unhappy with is that the second movie really spends a lot of time, and I mean a lot of time, just undoing what they had set up and established in the first movie. It was as if Todd Phillips didn't know what to do with this movie, and he had regrets about the first movie. So what he did was he just rewrote them in the second movie. It isn't very often that you see a sequel try to negatively compete against its predecessor, but this movie did that successfully. A couple of key examples here to really prove my point is that a big theme of the first movie is bad people getting what they deserve. I mean, that was one of the most memorable lines, basically, in the entire first movie. It was normal people who were underappreciated, like Arthur from the first movie, who were basically rising up and wanting their voices to be heard and take their own power back and right the wrongs that happened to them. But in the second movie, anyone that does wrong to Arthur basically just gets away with it. Nothing happens to anyone that does wrong in the second movie, which is just wild, because that was what the entire first movie was about. And on top of that, the whole first movie is about Arthur basically wanting to be someone. He wants to be someone. That's why he takes on the Joker persona. But in the second movie, he doesn't want to be Joker. He doesn't want the attention. He just wants to live a normal life, which doesn't make much sense, because every single time he is mentioned as a hero in the movie, his character immediately starts smiling and grinning. So I don't exactly know how he's super happy to be the hero, but at the same time does not want anything to do with being the Joker. Doesn't want to be known, doesn't want to be the hero, and just wants to live a normal life, because that's what he was doing in the first movie. Next, I have to talk about Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn, or in this movie, Lee. I don't think she did a bad job in this role, but at the same time, this character was utterly useless. I think you could have completely removed this character from the movie, and you would have had the same movie, essentially. She had no impact in the movie whatsoever. I think one of the biggest red flags straight away is that they were kind of introducing her to be Harley Quinn, but then, you know, you hear all these reports of saying, like, well, no, she has no connections to her comic book self. She just happens to have some of the same similarities, which is fine, I guess, if you were continuing this directly off the first movie and kind of building her story up with the Joker. And I actually think that they didn't do that bad of a job, like, rewriting her character. Her character was just useless with the way this movie went, with the pacing of the movie, with how far the story went, with the court trial. Like, she couldn't do anything, and she didn't do anything. Matter of fact, the more you watch this movie, the more you realize that she really doesn't interact with many other characters, and it genuinely makes you feel like she's not real at times. But unfortunately, she was, and she doesn't like Arthur, she likes the Joker, which does actually make sense. The downside of that is that it felt like they needed a conflict. So, because they wrote her that way, they also said, okay, well, Arthur doesn't want to be the Joker anymore. That'll be the main conflict, which made no sense to me. So, again, the character, I wouldn't say it was a bad performance at all. It just was that I didn't see a point to Harley Quinn being in the movie, or Lee. I also couldn't help but talk about momentum, because the first movie had a lot of build-up, like a ton of build-up. It's seemingly slow on the surface, with not a lot of action per se, but then it really ramps up towards the second half of the movie, which is really when it starts to become, like, entertaining and, like, have these huge payoffs. This second movie basically just doesn't even bother trying to recapture that magic. It doesn't even get close. Arthur is not the Joker much in this movie at all. He really isn't. And the times where he is when you really start to feel like, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Now we're going to build some momentum. Because in the court trial, around halfway point in the movie, Arthur fires his lawyer and becomes the Joker. Puts on the makeup, the suit, all that stuff. And he really starts to live it up for the cameras and everybody around. And that's where you really start to think, this is where the movie changes again. This is where it starts to ramp up. This is where he starts to go after the people that wronged him, all that stuff. So that about continues for maybe 15 minutes, and then you never see it again. That he completely puts away the Joker and does a 180 on it in almost 10 minutes. And then that momentum's gone forever. And then other times, you start to see some mediocre action, some things going on there, some stuff happening, and then you find out that it was just a musical number, so it was all in his head, and none of that actually happened. And then the momentum completely restarts again. Part of that goes into just the pacing being awful, but this movie just never really attempted to establish momentum in a meaningful way. The first one did a really good job of building that. This one didn't try. And now finally I have to talk about the ending, because this was one of the worst ways they could have ended it. Arthur basically loses the court case, which is unsurprising, and he gets told that he has a visitor. So he starts to go down this alley to get to the visitor or whatever in the prison, and some random guy appears to tell him a joke. And this person, or character, was in the movie a couple of times, but they were always in the background, and really you wouldn't notice them unless you were actively looking for them. And they go through this long joke where the punchline is the exact same punchline that the Joker said to Murray in the first movie. Instead of this being told to Arthur as like a I get you type of joke, this character uses that joke to basically set up his death. He says, you get what you deserve, and shanks Arthur, and he just bleeds out on screen, and that's the end of the movie. Oh, and I can't forget to mention, in the background, you can actually see that character carving a smile into his face to be the real Joker, which is something that Christopher Nolan adamantly refused Todd Phillips to do in the first movie. And now that Nolan isn't at Warner Brothers, Phillips said, let's just do it. Why not? Who's stopping me? So that is the ending he went with, and I think it's just one of the absolute worst endings you could have done. This whole movie obviously wasn't planned. they clearly did not have any intentions of making a sequel to this movie, but it made so much money that they felt like they have to. Unfortunately, Todd Phillips did what a lot of other directors didn't do. See, sometimes you have directors get offered these sequels and trilogies and stuff for movies that do well, and they just don't have incentives to do it well. They don't have stories, but they do it anyway and try to just copy what they did in the movies that were successful. That is not what Phillips did. What he did was try and do something completely different and rewrite his first movie with the second movie, and that's just idiotic if you ask me, and it shows in this movie. Now I know I'm a few months late to this, but it deserves the box office flop. It deserves the rating it got. I can't believe people looked over this movie and were like, we're good to go. But then again, it wasn't test screened, so I guess the higher-ups and Todd Phillips himself thought this was a masterpiece that didn't need reworking. And that's a shame, because I think this movie had true potential to carry on the legacy of the first one. It just didn't bother. So with that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I do have an announcement here at the end of the video. If you're new to this channel, which you probably are because it really just started, I wanted to let you all know that I will be posting twice a week on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So stick around, turn on notifications, subscribe, all that stuff. You will see consistent uploads from me at 3 p.m. on Wednesdays and Saturdays. So I hope to see all of you on those days when these videos go up. And hopefully we don't meet again on bad terms like how bad this movie was.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love